The old healer's hands moved with practiced certainty across the young man's back, placing each clay cup with the reverence of ritual. Steam rose from the heated vessels, clinging to skin before creating their seal. A pull that drew out pain, drew out poison, drew out the invisible weights that pressed upon the body. "My grandmother taught me this," the healer said, her voice carrying the rasp of 7 decades. "And her grandmother taught her. And before that, the knowledge flows back like a river to its source, back to when our people first understood that the body speaks and we must listen." This was in a small village in the highlands of Ethiopia in the year 2005, though the practice she performed belonged to no modern calendar. The young man, Tadesse, had come from Addis Ababa with his shoulders hunched from years bent over books, his back crying out in silent agony. In the city, doctors had offered him pills with names he couldn't pronounce, but his mother had sent him here, to the village of her birth, where medicine still remembered its ancient name. "Koso," the healer whispered, though this wasn't quite the word for what she did. Different peoples had different names. Tikurum Kwakwas in some Ethiopian tongues, Ventosa in the Portuguese-speaking regions, Hijama in the Islamic traditions that had intertwined with African practices for over a millennium. But the principle remained constant. Create a vacuum, let the skin rise, let the blood flow to the surface, let the body remember how to heal itself. What Tadesse didn't know, what most of the world didn't know, was that this practice predated memory itself on this continent. In the cool highlands of Ethiopia and Eritrea, in the vast expanses of the Sahel, along the Nile's ancient banks, across the southern savannas and in the dense forests of Central Africa, people had been practicing cupping therapy for thousands of years. Archaeological evidence whispered of it. Ancient tools that could serve no other purpose, cave paintings that suggested the ritual, oral histories that stretched back before writing existed to record them. The Egyptians had documented it in the Ebers Papyrus, dated to 1550 BCE, but they were merely recording what already was, what had been practiced in the Nile Valley and beyond for generations uncounted before pharaohs carved their names in stone. In traditional African medicine, cupping was never isolated. It was part of a holistic understanding of the body that Western medicine would not articulate for centuries. The healers understood that pain in one part of the body could originate from imbalance in another. They knew that emotional trauma could manifest as physical ailment. They practiced cupping alongside herbs, alongside spiritual healing, alongside the wisdom that health was not the absence of disease, but the presence of harmony. The healer lifted the cups from Tadesse's back, revealing perfect circles of reddened skin, each one a small sun rising on the landscape of his body. "In 3 days come back," she instructed, "and tell me how your body speaks to you." 3 days later, Tadesse returned, his walk straighter, his shoulders loose. "The pain is less," he admitted, surprise coloring his voice. "But how? How does this work?" The healer smiled. "The fire heats the air inside the cup. When the cup touches skin, the air cools and contracts, creating a pull. This brings blood to the surface, encourages circulation, releases tension held deep in the muscle. But that is the physical answer. There is also the answer of energy, of balance, of the body remembering its natural state." What Tadesse didn't know, what most of the world didn't know, was that this practice predated memory itself on this continent. Science would eventually catch up to what practice had always known. But by then, cupping would have traveled far from its African roots. The practice had moved along trade routes, carried by Arab merchants who learned it from African practitioners and incorporated it into Islamic medicine. It traveled with the expansion of empires, with colonizers who took the knowledge, but rarely the credit. It moved through China, where it became integrated into traditional medicine systems and was documented in texts that would be preserved when African oral traditions were dismissed as primitive. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, when Western celebrities appeared at red carpet events with the telltale circular bruises on their backs, when Olympic athletes praised cupping for recovery, When wellness spas in Los Angeles and London began offering it at premium prices, few asked where it came from. The marketing told a different story, an ancient Chinese therapy, perhaps with mentions of Middle Eastern practice. Africa was erased from the narrative, as it had been erased from so many narratives. The continent that birthed humanity, that developed sophisticated medical practices millennia before Europe emerged from its dark ages, was written out of its own history. Tadesse learned this years later when he became a researcher documenting traditional medical practices. He found that what his grandmother's healer had done in that highland village was part of an unbroken chain of knowledge passed down through generations that had survived colonization, survived the dismissal of African knowledge systems, survived the systematic devaluation of everything that came from black and brown bodies. He found elderly practitioners across the continent, each with their own techniques, their own tools. In some places they used animal horns, in others bamboo cups. Some used fire, others used suction created through other means. But all of them had learned from their elders, who had learned from theirs, who had learned from theirs, in a chain that stretched back before history had names. "We never lost it," one old healer told him during his research, her hands still strong despite her age. "They took so much from us, our people, our resources, our dignity. They rewrote our history and told the world we had none. But this lived in our hands, in our memories, in our practice. They couldn't take it because they didn't recognize its value, and now they claim it as theirs." The irony was bitter. The same medical establishments that had dismissed traditional African healing as witchcraft now studied cupping in clinical trials. The same societies that had banned traditional healers now paid handsomely for the same treatments in sterile spas, never acknowledging where the knowledge originated. But in villages across Africa, in urban clinics run by those who honored both traditional and modern medicine, in homes where grandmothers still taught granddaughters, the practice continued, not as a trend, not as wellness theater, but as it had always been. A healing art, refined over millennia, that understood the body more than flesh and bone. Tadesse's research would document this. He would write papers, give lectures, insist on the African origins of cupping therapy. Some would listen. Many would continue to ignore or minimize, but the truth, like the raised skin under a heated cup, would eventually surface. Because history, like the body, remembers. And what was taken without credit, what was practiced in the shadows of dismissal, what survived despite everything, that carries its own power. The young man who had once come to his mother's village seeking relief from pain had found more than healing. He had found a connection to knowledge that predated nations, that survived empires, that belonged to Africa long before the world decided to pay attention. And in that small village, the old healer continued her work, her hands moving with the certainty of millennia, creating the sacred vacuum between fire and skin, drawing poison to the surface, encouraging the body to remember what it had always known, how to heal itself. The cups rose, the skin remembered, and the ancient practice continued, unconcerned with who claimed credit, focused only on what it had always been focused on, the patient before it, the pain to be eased, the body to be brought back into balance. That was the real story, not of discovery, but of survival, not of copying, but of theft, not of innovation, but of appropriation. Africa had always known. The rest of the world had just finally decided to listen, even if they weren't ready to acknowledge from whom they learned.